back, viewers. You're still with me, Waqar Rizvi, and we're still watching Scope. In this segment, we're going to discuss the US imposing tariffs on the European Union. That has now gone through seemingly, even though last-minute talks did not seemingly were not able to, stop the situation from going through. As we had spoken about last week as well, the U.S. had spoken about this issue of Airbus specifically versus Boeing, and saying that Airbus was getting unfair subsidies from the respective governments involved in the parts that go into making those Airbus planes. That's not the only issue, of course, on the table. There are other companies as well that will be affected. Upwards of $7.5 billion worth of tariffs now on European goods will be placed by the United States. Europe has warned that it may very well retaliate, even though the German finance minister is in Washington, D.C., seemingly trying to scramble negotiations to try to prevent the imposition of these tariffs at this time. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Ron Keller, who is a former Dutch ambassador. He's also a former top advisor at the EU and the Dutch Ministries of Finance and Foreign Affairs. He's joining us now from The Hague. Joining us from Stockholm is Glenn Hodgson, who is a founder and CEO of Free Trade Europa, which promotes free trade, openness, and personal choice. Glenn and Ron, thank you both for your time today. Ron, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of the imposition of these tariffs? It was a legitimate point, was it not, on the issue of subsidies given to Airbus?
Yeah, thank you, Waqar. I think the ruling, after about 15 years of procedures in the World Trade Organization, is there. And the ruling is made in accordance with the rules that we agreed as international community on trade. And it allows the United States to impose a kind of a similar amount of tariffs for which Airbus is convicted of being subsidized over the last decades. It allows the U.S. to do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be implemented, of course, those tariff sanctions. The U.S. chose to do so, and that fits into the overall policies of the Trump administration to renegotiate trade arrangements, to toughen their stance on global relations and trade, be a bit more protectionistic and isolationistic, and that is all bad news for the world economy and for the U.S. economy included. So this is, yes, it was to be expected after 15 years, a ruling. Yeah. But the timing is unfortunate. It coincides with the worsening of international trade relations.
Okay, so Glenn, what are your thoughts on this? Because I imagine this argument can go both ways, right? The U.S. could say, listen, international norms and these rules at the WTO were put in place for a reason, as Ron there alluded to as well. So it won the case, and so it's putting in these tariffs. I mean, it's sort of just cause and effect, isn't it? Why then would EU have a problem with this?
I think one of the big reasons within this moment is, as we were hearing just now, the global economy is obviously going into a very tricky period. And I think that, the last thing we need is another trade war, a trade war being opened up on another front. We're already seeing the effects of the US-China disputes. And now, of course, we're bringing sort of Europe into it. And I think that it's enlightened self-interest. President Trump is a smart guy, and he realizes that he needs to get elected again next year. And with the softening signs in the U.S. economy, history clearly shows that no sitting U.S. president has ever been re-elected when the U.S. economy has been going into a recession. I think also there's the similar issue here. We see that there is a case open against Boeing as well. We're probably going to see the result of that in the new year. And basically, this is a tit-for-tat trade spat. And at the end of the day, it looks like the WTO is going to rule against Boeing as well. And it's just very sad to see that the U.S. administration will not try and come to a deal now, but will try and put in place these tariffs, get the money, and then probably look to some kind of deal once the WTO ruling comes through against Boeing in the new year. We could save a lot of time and a lot of effort, and basically from the European and the global economy, as well as the US economy, that is being hurt by this ongoing death by 1,000 cuts.
Indeed, and Ron, a lot of people think that small businesses especially, and those that sell French wine, Italian cheese, Scottish whiskey, etc., that they will be hurt the most in this trade war between the EU and the US, at least on the EU side, I'm saying. Do you think that this is more politics than actually just about trade? Because that's an argument made by many people as well, that the Europeans and the Americans now actually disagree on many political issues as well, and that America is almost acting out against Europe for that reason?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. Let me first say that these measures are, and I could agree very much with Glenn. These measures do not only about wine and about olive oil. It fits into the wider picture. Bear in mind that earlier the U.S. has imposed sanctions on steel and aluminium. Likewise, some European countries, notably France, and I think Britain is to follow, have imposed a so-called digital sector, services sector tariff. So you see that there is indeed a wider issue at stake. There could be, the US has been threatening with that, there could be in the future an increase in tariffs on cars, car import, very important for the European economy and for the German economy in particular. So it fits into a wider picture, and not only small and medium-sized enterprises are affected, it really affects the whole of our economies at a time that we don't need it. Actually, we are already faced with a downturn, as Glenn just mentioned. Does it fit into a wider picture of a divergence between the United States and Europe? I think firmly yes. I think it's fair to say that since, let's say, roughly the Cold War, during the Cold War period, U.S. and European geopolitical interests have more or less overlapped. After the fall of the wall, Europe has come into a completely different geopolitical situation. We are not good in formulating our own interests in that respect. We still struggle to get to a united foreign policy and strategic thinking, but it is clear that Europe is rethinking its own position. The United States has to get used to that and has to accept that, but find it hard to accept these realities. So it fits indeed into the wider picture of the worsening of the relationship between Europe and the US. At the time, I say, when all of the countries and nations together, including China, Russia, and other parts of the world, need to team up firmly for global challenges like climate and other issues.
All right, so then, Glenn, it's actually more politics than actually just about trade, as I'd put to Ron, because again, if that is the case, and obviously we can list a number of political issues that the European bloc and the Americans would disagree on, and I can pick up, the Iran nuclear deal, for example, and I'm sure there are other issues, be it climate change as well, the Paris Climate Accord. There are some key issues as well that these two sides disagree on. Is it more really about the politics than actually just a case about Airbus versus Boeing, for example?
Yeah, I definitely think it's really the case of what we're looking at now is politics, and this is what's coming into it as well. I mean, I think that the way this is being sort of pulled out as well at the moment, whereby we're getting sectors that are completely blameless being brought into it, whether it's Italian olive oil, Scotch whiskey, French wines that are being hit by this, and it's going to cost jobs. It's going to cost a lot of political badwill as well. And I think that as we're just hearing now, absolutely, we're seeing this sort of schism, and almost in a global setting, we're seeing sort of the US going off in one direction, we're seeing China going off in another direction, and Europe sort of trying to sort of do this balancing act where it sort of keeps everyone happy. But I think what we're definitely going to see is a separate path. And I think we're going to see this existing relationships and forging a new future is something that's going to be tested more and more, not just now, but into the future when we're talking about sort of competition, industrial policy, how we deal with technology, the environment. This is just sort of the start of an ongoing process. We're going to see more and more of that as we go into the future. But at the end of the day, we really need to have sort of working together to address global problems. And sadly, this is something that we're forgetting at the moment. The economy will suffer. the environment will suffer, and instead of fighting each other, there should be more of an effort to work together, as we see now with the global rules-based trading system, which is really under threat.
Indeed. So, Ron, I wonder, do you think